Hi all, Rick here. This video is looking at the Peregrine class attack fighter, Starfleet's most identifiable fighter craft class of ship, which is something that we don't often see in Star Trek, considering dogfights rarely decide the outcome of a clash of capital ships. In fact, in canon, we are technically not even sure that this is the Peregrine class, with them simply being referred to as Federation attack fighters, while reference to the Peregrine class, which is a small 1 or 2 person fighter, is also made separately. Most licensed work, therefore, assumes that the two are one and the same. The Peregrine class is the first definitive fighter ship of Starfleet that we see, and several sources have differing accounts. So, the origin for these little ships is apparently from non-Starfleet design. It is said that they were designed as civilian courier vessels to get someone around a star system in the same manner as a shuttlecraft, just with a little more flair. However, there are some inconsistencies with that, considering their specifications and how easily armed they are. For a start, much excess bulk is down to the effective warp drive, torpedo storage, and heavy phaser weaponry. We have seen how much smaller you can make a ship when implemented for shuttlecraft and for vessels that feature no warp, only impulse drives. For example, we can look at the Academy's training flight craft, or even a regular shuttlecraft if you just need something with a minimum inter-system warp jumps. It looks like these ships were designed as fighters from the start, in 2367 to be heavier hitting than a shuttlecraft and without the multi-role functions of a runabout. The Andorian Imperial Shipyards already had its own version of this fighter, a courier vessel designed for personal transport that was more durable than a shuttle, so it was selected as the base. The motivation for this had been the ease with which the Mars Perimeter Defense Fleet was overrun by the Borg. However, considering the lack of fighters in Star Trek's setting, there must be a reason. The likelihood is simply that they are unlikely to be able to deal much damage to a starship, while most starship targeting acquisition is good enough to shoot them down easily. There was a notable lack of large-scale fleet battles in Starfleet over the decades, with warfare usually ending up being several large vessels exchanging blows. Plus, the Starfleet tries to maintain the mandate of exploration first, and travelling around with a hangar deck full of combat-oriented ships flies in the face of that. Therefore, it's probable that the smaller number of fighters that were created for Starfleet's use were soon seen as redundant, with a shuttlecraft being able to fit that role if needed, while also being capable varied task auxiliary ships. So these vessels were defanged, disarmed, and passed into civilian circulation. From here, the Maquis, always short on resources, managed to obtain them and rearm them as skirmishers once again. Upon seeing their effectiveness with running interference against larger Cardassian ships, Starfleet doubled back on the decision not to use fighter craft and started manufacturing them to join the hangars of their starships in wartime. By the close of the Dominion War, the fighters were no longer present in the holds of starships, with them instead being assigned to starbase and local patrol and defense. Starfleet security continued to operate these ships in defending key areas to intercept craft that were potential threats. So whether predating the Dominion War or during it, Starfleet looked at the lack of smaller fighters and sought to address this. While there are numerous other non-canon vessels, the Peregrine is the first we see for sure. Starting with a runabout as their base point, Starfleet essentially took all the science capabilities, cargo storage, and long-range mission aptitude out of the design. In its place, they beefed up the weapons systems a lot, added wings for in-atmosphere capabilities too, and souped up the warp drive. There was no need for living spaces nor anything other than the cockpit, as they were not meant for missions lasting longer than a few hours, a day at most. These new small craft were fast and manoeuvrable ships that held surprising firepower for their scale. While one was unlikely to stand a chance against a contemporary starship, it could at least harass the shielding and prevent it from regenerating, while an attack wing of 6 could downright do considerable damage. This became a tactic worth considering among larger fleet operations during the Dominion War. Internally, there was life support and a single cockpit with room for 1 or 2 people, depending on the design. Most of the time each vessel only carried the pilot, but an adjacent seat could be added if needed. Behind this room was the entry chamber with warp core access and the airlock. Possibly a toilet. I doubt there was even a replicator though, considering it was not meant to operate away from a mothership or base. The ship was around 18 meters long, but I have seen references to them being closer to 25. For the warp systems, they had a powerful micro-Cochrane matter-antimatter warp core, similar to most shuttlecraft. However, it was supercharged to be able to reach much higher velocities, but the trade-off in warp coil abundance meant that it could only hold maximum warp for around 30 minutes. Its cruise speed was widely agreed to be around warp 4, but its maximum has been listed as 7 and even 9 for short bursts. It did have Picard collectors present at the fore of the nacelles, and 2 large impulse engines at the rear which made up the largest parts of the vessel. They had decent shielding, but it looks to be around that of a shuttlecraft, less resistant than a runabout. Their hull armour was negligible, thanks to their size. So when it comes to the weapons systems, most sources agree on its loadout, however the placement of them is a little up in the air. Even the shows routinely have it firing from what appears to be the Picard collectors on the warp nacelles, with both pulse phasers and torpedoes, so this is going to have to be chalked up to an error, unless there are emitters just above that could be the source of the bursts. Either way, there are 3 main phaser points. Under the front is a single Type 8 dual pulse phaser cannon turret that can provide the widest field of fire. Then there are the 2 phaser points that are harder to pin down. Each wing features 3 outputs in weapon clusters, which seem to be the most likely weapons points, for a total of 3 phaser cannons overall. Then there were the 2 Type 4 turrets over the nacelles at the front. Either way, these cannon weapons were based on the same tech that went into the Defiance systems, just smaller, so they pack a punch well above their weight. Finally, there are the 3 micro-photon torpedo launchers of the same type occasionally found in shuttles or runabouts. There are again 2 front-facing and a single rear one. Each vessel carries 10 photons. Their standard deployment depends on what their base was. In large-scale fleet battles, they operated in flights of 6 spread across numerous squadrons, each beholden to a coordinating flagship. The Peregrine was a nice implementation, but found very niche success during the Dominion War. Typically ineffectual against larger ships, it was only victorious when deployed alongside support. The Peregrine seems to have found its place in security interception. One could even place their high fatality rate during the Dominion War at the feet of Starfleet Command, who were unpracticed with the effective use of such skirmishers. But when it comes to security, it looks like they operated in pairs, and when not on patrol they were dispatched to intercept threats. The Peregrine is more than a match for a shuttle or even most cargo vessels, but they would struggle to halt the advance of any true hostile starship. However, in this case they're expected to report back to their base, which can likely call in heavier reinforcements, and then they likely tail the intruder, maintaining sensor contacts and potentially running hindrance. You know, hitting the weapons or engine systems and running away again. And that covers the origin and lore of the Federation's only canon fighter vessel. As I said, there have been others mentioned in external licensed lore. A favourite of mine was the presence of many in the video game Star Trek Shattered Universe. Would you like to see more such small ships in Star Trek? I think I would, purely because it's more new ships. But I don't think Trek should focus on this. Thanks for watching this breakdown on the Peregrine class fighter. Until the next one, I've been Rick, and goodbye.